Hello everyone, my name is Shivang Joshi and I'm co-founder of Law Community. Today, I welcome you all on Lawyer Speaks. And in this session, we have invited a very prominent guest, Mr. Ninad Lord. He is a counsel at Supreme Court of India and specializes in mining, environment, insolvency, white-collar crimes, and RIFs. We welcome Sir on our show to know more about his journey.
So let me start with the first question. How was your experience in law school, and what are your views about Indian professional education system?
Well, I can speak only for law, and I think the 5-year course definitely is a good concept, and it's done well for a lot of us. I was also in a 5-year course, and I think it gives the right balance of not just law, but the background that we have in the first couple of years in terms of a bit of humanities, a bit of language, things like that are also quite helpful. Also history that we had. I particularly enjoyed the modules of history that we had in the first couple of years. So yes, I think that is one good aspect of the 5-year course, coupled with the fact that in the final year, it is largely practical education rather than theory itself. So that again is clearly a advantage of, I'm guessing that that's what you're referring to when you say professional education. In terms of law, that would only be that. I can't speak for the 3-year course. But I mean, you've had people come out of both courses and everyone's equally good. So I think there's no straitjacket formula to what's good and what's not.
Okay, so you just mentioned about 3-year and 5-year course. You must have heard about 3-year course and the curriculum of 3-year course in India. So what, according to you, is better for students to go for? Should they go for a 5-year course or a 3-year course? Which one is better for their making them as a lawyer?
Well, I think that's not an easy question to answer. Sometimes I feel, personally speaking, that perhaps if I had a degree before the 3 years of legal education might have probably served me well. The theory back in the US and the UK is that you need to be a little more mature before you start your legal studies, which is why you have, especially in the US, you can't do it directly. So you have to graduate first in a stream and then come for law. I think, speaking for myself, I think I would have perhaps preferred to have a degree perhaps in history before I could have taken up law. But I think at the point where I had to decide, law seemed like the most logical option. And since there was a 5-year course, the overwhelming opinion around me was that I should go for a 5-year course.
Perfect. So when and how did you incline towards commercial litigation?
Yeah, so I think through my internships, I somehow veered towards litigation. I had interned with a couple of lawyers in the Supreme Court. I had interned with a judge of the Supreme Court as well. And having seen it sort of from both sides, litigation seemed like a clear choice. I did work in a couple of law firms in Bombay as well, and did enjoy that. But ultimately, for me, it felt as if the action lies in the courts, and it is hard to be away from the action, and which is why I think I eventually stuck to litigation.
So you have worked with Mr. Mukul Rastogi, sir. So how was your experience learning from him, and what did you learn? What was your life lesson while you were working with him?
Well, it's quite tough to actually list out all the life lessons that I've had from him, because there are quite many. But the few most important ones that I can think of are, the first would be discipline in terms of his schedule, how he works, and it's a regime that he follows, come what may, every single day. He starts early in the morning, and I've rarely seen any exception happening to that. So I think that's something I struggled initially, but eventually learned from him. And I think that makes a huge, huge difference in terms of how you discipline yourself in terms of your routine. The second would be, of course, to how to approach litigation, how to approach cases, and in particular with him, something that he's known for is to sort of pick the pin out of the haystack, because as you know, he does a large number of cases, probably more than anyone else at the Supreme Court. And yet to do all of them to everyone's satisfaction is an achievement which very few can very few can achieve. And he's known to achieve that. And I think the key to that is the fact that he knows how to pick the crux of the matter really quickly and to proceed on that basis. And that brings me to the third big lesson, which I hope to learn, and I hope to someday sort of follow him in that, which is to how to approach a hearing in court in terms of presentation, which I think he's one of the best in that department. And as you know, in the Supreme Court, especially on a day when cases are admitted, the average time is a couple of minutes. And it's those couple of minutes that determine the fate of a lot of people, including your success in the case. And I think that's quite amazing to see how he decides on, at that moment, what to say and how much to say. So I think these are the three big lessons, apart from, of course, the fact that, which some things that go without saying, which is to be extremely sure of the legal position and to check it out beforehand and things like that.
So you just mentioned about skills required by when you have to go in a court of law before Supreme Court or High Court or even District Court. So what, according to you, are the skills required and what these young lawyers lack or should they work upon?
Well, I can't really comment that someone lacks anything, but I think what is needed of any lawyer, I think, is a thorough preparation, both of facts and of law. And then eventually a clear strategy in their minds about how they go about the case when it comes up. For a litigator, I think eventually all the preparation and everything eventually boils down to what happens in those I think to think it through is, I think, the key. So you might have prepared really well, but eventually on the day, at the moment when your case is called out, if you can't really use or utilize your preparation to get the results, it is all a futile exercise. So I think eventually what matters the most is those moments about how you present it, which can't really be done as a matter of chance. It has to be thought through.
Okay, so coming back to your work experience, like what was your role as a foreign lawyer when you were working with Rajan & Tann LLP?
If you're not qualified in Singapore, so you are given this designation as a foreign lawyer, which means that you typically work on arbitrations rather than the litigations in court. And of course, I had a short stint. So it's largely revolved around research, which fortunately their legal system is similar to that of India. So it wasn't much of a problem. That apart, I think I did learn a good amount of lessons in drafting in that short stint there, because especially with arbitrations, there are frankly no second chances. It's the first proceeding in a litigation or in a dispute. So my experience there was mainly to do with drafting and research. I was too young, of course, at that point, and too junior at the bar to do anything else.
And also, for a brief period of time, you've also worked with AZB and Partners. So how was your journey there?
Yeah, that was also quite an interesting experience. I'd seen the pressures of Supreme Court litigation, having worked already with Mr. Rohatgi. In AZB, again, the sort of organization it is, the amount of work that comes in and the amount of the work schedules is pretty interesting. I think they strive for excellence in everything that they do. And I think surely a lot of lessons there as well in terms of how the finished product, if I may call it, in terms of any drafting or any opinions, etc., was something that I've definitely learned from there.
So if I'm not wrong, your area of expertise lies in environmental law and insolvency, insolvency laws. So according to you, during this current pandemic situation, what recent changes have been brought by the government in the insolvency law, and it has been suspended for 6 months. So what, according to you, will be the after effects of it?
I think that was a much needed intervention by the government. And yes, it will have a lot of effect because a lot of people who don't really deserve it might have taken umbrage of that embargo that has come in. At the same time, for all genuine cases, it's definitely helped them. So the after effect I would see is, a lot of it will depend on what happens right after the embargo is lifted and when things get to normal, how it's perceived, the period of the embargo. And it should be an interesting time for the NCLT in particular to interpret and to view facts in that light once the embargo is lifted.
So you must be attending Supreme Court hearings right now through virtual hearing system. So do you think that this is an effective system? Like, is it able to provide justice to litigants, or are there any flaws to it? What, according to you, changes can be made in the system?
Yeah, I think at the outset, I must say that you have to view that situation in contrast with what would be if it wasn't there. You can imagine a situation where there would have been no court at all, and that would have been an absolute disaster. So it's a great start. It's surely not perfect, but I think that it's done really well, and it is evolving. It is going to take some time for both the bar and the bench to get used to it, and also for the peripheral infrastructure to be sort of improved. As you know, almost every other court in the country is using a different app to hold these hearings, and there have been teething problems with the apps. There have been problems with people learning how to use the apps. Yes, of course, there are some issues that remain. For instance, in any hearing, especially a final hearing or any hearing, you tend to find case law at the last moment. How do you cite that? Of course, there's screen sharing on most of these apps, and it is being used, no doubt. But I think it's a matter of getting used to it. And in terms of improvement, I think perhaps at least for the Supreme Court, an app other than video can be thought of. Because having appeared in some high courts, I find that a lot of the apps that the high courts use are much more efficient. There's lesser chances of glitches, really, that I have in my limited experience seen. But otherwise, I think it's a fine system for the future. I think a lot of cases could be done on this basis permanently. For instance, one good example that I can think of is the transfer petitions that come to the Supreme Court. And actually, it takes a lot of time and space. Of course, recent changes have ensured that they now come before a single judge. I think that proceeding, for instance, can surely be done forever through a video conferencing system, because it's the contours of arguments in those cases are very limited. It's a short question, really, matters of convenience rather than of law. And as a result, I think that is something that can be easily addressed without huge pleadings and the sort, which may not be true, though, of course, for other cases. So it still remains to be seen. It still remains to be tested for final hearings, say, in a constitution bench. It's yet to happen. I don't know if it's being contemplated in the near future, but that's going to be a challenge, because I think where there's huge amount of paper, I've had just one experience where we had a case listed where there were multiple interlocutory applications, and each of them paginated differently. And the bench was frank enough to say that it's virtually impossible to hear this case if you have 10 sets of applications, all of them differently paginated, and they would have to shuffle through all of this, and they felt uncomfortable. So I think eventually, when the registry devises a method by which everything is hyperlinked with, a common pagination for all pleadings of all sides, maybe things might be much more easier.
So if you suppose that the system continues for another year or year and a half, do you think it will be able to deliver justice that was being delivered in person?
I think presently very few people really are complaining about how it's going in terms of fresh cases. So I can speak mainly for the Supreme Court. Fresh cases, the manner in which they were heard previously and the manner in which they're being heard over video conferencing, there's very little really to distinguish those hearings. But the question, as I said, largely remains with final hearings, which is something that has just begun from the last week that has gone by. And we'll have to see how the Supreme Court, through its registry, evolves systems by which final hearings can also be seamlessly done over video conferencing. And I think if that is achieved, frankly, it would go a long way in doing justice.
So, isn't it a delay in justice system because of the virtual hearing system right now?
I don't really see that being a reason for the delay. It's rather, in fact, helping plug the delay, because you must understand the online filing, though there are teething problems with any new thing, I'm sure in the long run, the online filing is going to ensure that there'll be less delays. You'll be able to bring up cases for hearing, for instance, from the date of filing much, much quicker. Because once you have a processing system in place by which these online filings can be processed quickly, I'm sure listings will also happen much, much faster than they used to happen physically. So similarly, even with the hearings, I think a lot more can be achieved in the long run through video conferencing. So I do not see any negative about it, except for the present. At the present, there is no system devised really in terms of how final hearings can be dealt with, where there's a huge amount of pleadings and you have compilations of judgments and things of the sort. So once that is sorted out, or the manner in which two sides can share screens, etc., I think there should frankly be very little problem. And speaking as a junior lawyer, I think it's a great opportunity for us to appear through video conferencing, because it's probably less overawing for us to appear through video conferencing than in person. Also, it's probably a slightly better experience from what we used to have on miscellaneous days because of the crowded nature of the courts. I think we are all happy to be away from that. Yes, there was some excitement of being there in person. Yes, there's always that can never be replaced. But at the same time, I think there's very little to complain by the system that is in vogue at the moment.
So coming back to your experience, like you spent more than 14 years in Supreme Court of India, advocating in Supreme Court of India. So how was your professional journey in Supreme Court?
Well, I think when you begin, you are largely shadowing your senior. You're just watching things. And I think for me, it began with largely researching for my senior and finding case law over and above what had already been found by the briefing counsel who would come to brief him. Eventually, after a couple of years or so, I did have my own cases, and I did get the odd drafting work from here and there. And so I think after about 5 years, I could say that I had a practice of my own. But I, of course, work with, I continue to work with Mr. Rawatgi from his chambers at least till 2014. And I mean, I still do work very closely with him, but I've just had my own office since then. So in terms of the progression, I think, and since I'm guessing you're asking this question in terms of advice for students and lawyers who are now joining the bar, I think good amount of patience is a vital factor. One can't really jump to anything too soon. And I think if your preparation is right, opportunities come. And that's all one can hope for. And I continue to hope for.
Right. So what would you advise to law students who are pursuing their law right now to engage into, like, what kind of activities should they engage into so that will help them in their later life as a lawyer when they will be practicing?
Well, I think once you are at law school, perhaps by the third, if assuming you're in the 5-year course, I would guess that by the third year, you have a fair idea of where your leanings are. If you are attracted to litigation or you're attracted to something else. If you think litigation is your calling, then I think the one thing that cannot be avoided is mooting. I think there's nothing that comes close to real practice than mooting as far as litigation is concerned. So I think there's no option. You cannot shy away from mooting, and at whatever level it may be at your own university, or it may be at a national level or an international level. Every opportunity for mooting must be grabbed with both hands, because I think it goes a long, long way in refining a lot of skills which are very much required every day in the life of a litigator. But I think one easy way to do that is actually in terms of your internships. I think if in the first couple of years, if you try and intern with a varied sort of set of people, if you could work with a litigator, if you could work with a law firm that does predominantly non-litigation work, and maybe at a senior counsel's chamber, etc. I think you will get all the perspectives, and I think one can make a choice based on that. because that is the only way one can have only if after you've seen things as they happen in reality can you actually have inclination for them. So I think you need to give yourself the opportunity of having seen them and having seen all of them. And I think only then one can make an informed choice.
So, do you think that there's a particular number of internships that a student should do while they're in college, or like any number would do?
Really, I think there's no straitjacket formula. But as I just said, if you could give yourself the chance to intern with at least these three sets of people, which is a sole practitioner, if I may call it that way, a litigator, a law firm, then of course a senior counsel is able to get an internship with. I think if one interns at all these three places, or from the Supreme Court perspective, I would say working with an AOR's firm or an advocate on record would also be one such experience. So if one has worked in these four sets of practices, then I think one is able to make an informed choice. And if you do that early, perhaps, yes, you may be knowing very little at the time that you're interning. But I think if you like one of them, you can repeat and work with either the same person or someone who does similar work, by which I think by the time you're about to graduate, you have a fair idea and you're able to make up your mind.
Thank you so much for joining and taking our time from your busy schedule. And we wish you all the best for your future endeavors.